Ready, Linda? Okay. Okay, good afternoon, everybody. I'm Martha Wells. I'm the president of the Chatham Township Historical Society. Thanks so much for being here this afternoon. So this is the autumnal equinox, the first day of fall. So coming up is our open day at the Red Brick Schoolhouse Museum. That will be on October the 6th. It's the first Sunday of every month from 2 to 4. And our speaker next month will be Joan Kalisha, who will talk about winter flexible flyers and other great sleds. So she'll be appearing here. You'll be able to, we'll send out our newsletter by email, and I'm going to pass this around. This is our guest book. You have to, if you sign in, here is this. That one. Your name, your zip code, and your email if you'd like to get future notices about what's going on. So today we're going to welcome Mrs. Bennett, who is going to tell you about following the soldiers in the Revolution. Mrs. Bennett.
Yeah. We've been walking a long way, so I'm really hot. Get rid of this. That's better. Okay. And all the way down from Williamsburg today. My name is Polly Bennett, and I've been following the Army. It's not something I ever intended to do, and I don't recommend it. But I thought I'd tell you something about what it's like, and I do keep a journal, so I'll refer to that just so I remember to tell you everything I want to tell you. I raised my family on a farm just north of New Brunswick, 2 daughters and a son. My daughters are married and have moved away south of New Brunswick. My husband died in 1774, so my son and I have been farming since then. Now, my daughter's sons, sadly, are loyal to King George. So my daughters no longer answer my letters, and I'm afraid they're lost to me. Daughters and sometimes sisters, and lots of children. These were young women, so there were lots of children. And the women I walk with today have lots of children. Now, all of them were there for the same reason. They didn't feel safe at home. There were loyalists around them who could harm them just as much as the enemy, the soldiers of King George could. And some of them were newlywed couples, and she just wouldn't stay home. One of them was a newlywed woman whose family sent her away because they didn't like the man that she married. So she joined the army too. Interestingly, there are very few doxies. Now, the longer we've been in a camp, then the more we see this kind of woman showing up. But the soldiers don't have any money, so they can't pay these women. But some of the officers do. So that's actually who's responsible for those doxies. So how do we get to stay with the army? We have to work. We don't freeload. Most of us women are washerwomen because General Washington wants the uniforms clean. Even if they're nothing but rags, they better be clean rags. And he says this is because it keeps the army free of some of the diseases. And I believe him. I've always believed that and kept my children clean too. Now, we're supposed to be paid by the piece for the laundry that we do. And the commanding officer will set the maximum amount that we can charge. But most of the soldiers have no money because they never get paid. So we don't get paid, but we still get fed. As long as we work, we get rations. So we work even though we don't get paid. And we get one ration a day, just like the privates do. And that might be a pound of beef or 3/4 pound of pork or a pound of fish or a quart of beans, maybe a pint of rice, and we get a pound of flour that you can cook into something. But a lot of the time, there isn't enough food to provide that much of a ration, so we often get less than that. The children get a half ration, and if they're very little, they have to share that. Now, the officers get 2 rations, and I'd like to know why. Because in camp, the men are doing more work, and when we're marching, they're riding. So why do they get 2, and the men who are working so hard only get 1? But that's the army for you, that's how it is. Now, the other things that we can do for work is sometimes you can cook. Most of the time, the soldiers will cook for themselves. There's a group of 6 that will be messmates. And if one of the men has a wife, then there will be 4 men and the wife, and that will be the mess group. And sometimes though, if we're in camp for a while, there are artificers and carpenters and blacksmiths. And for some reason, they don't know how to cook. So they hire someone like me to cook for them. And every now and then, there are officers to cook for. Now that's the easiest one. They have more food, it's easier to cook. The other thing that we sometimes do is they sometimes force us to be nurses. Nobody wants this job. It's just hard and difficult. So we don't want to do it, but they can tell us that we have to do it because we're in the army, we have to obey orders, even though we never enlisted. So when a patient comes in, we wash them all over with warm water. And then every day we wash their hands and face and comb their hair so they think they're still in the land of the living. We sweep the floors, sprinkle vinegar on the floors 2 or 3 times a day, and we change the linen when we're told to change the linen. But most of and emptying chamber pots, that's the really big thing. And it's a dangerous job because we know that we could get typhoid or typhus or camp fever or one of the other diseases that these men come in with. And most of them are there with diseases. It's only after a battle or a skirmish where we may find injured soldiers there, but mostly it's sick men and sometimes the women too. When we're on the march, first I have to say, General Washington does not like having women in his army. He does not like this at all. He calls us a clog to every step. And first, we were allowed to follow the soldiers and be in front of the baggage train. And this was fine, because we were there, we could talk to our men, and even if our men were far ahead, we could talk to somebody else. It was quite nice. But then General Washington decided we were distracting. So now we have to follow the baggage train. So now we are truly baggage too. And we've never been allowed to ride on the baggage wagons. We sneak on them sometimes anyway, and we certainly sneak children onto them, but we're not supposed to be on the wagon train. We've heard this over and over and over. We're supposed to walk behind them. Now, there are dozens and dozens of wagons in the wagon train, in the baggage train. And what pulls those wagons? Horses. And we're at the end of the line. So what are we walking in? Yes, and I think that was done on purpose. Now, General Washington would never do that to one of his ladies because they're of a whole nother class. They're ladies, but we are baggage. Now, if it's not too bad, we're often, if the dirt is nice and sandy, we'll take off our shoes. If it's really muddy, we'll take off our shoes because shoes wear out. So as much as you can, you go without shoes. And sometimes it's kind of nice when it's nice and sandy. So the first spring and summer that my son enlisted and I joined the Army, we were in South Jersey and we marched all around, finally went north to New York City and then south to a town outside of west of Philadelphia. And we spent the whole time sort of watching General Howe and his redcoats to see what he would do. And he really kept General Washington waiting. Finally, they got on ships. They were in New York. They got on ships and they sailed away. Well, where were they going? Were they going to sail up the Hudson and really cause trouble by dividing the country in two? Or were they going to sail to Philadelphia? And sure enough, we got word that the boats were in the Chesapeake and that he was intending to attack Philadelphia, which is where the Continental Congress was sitting. It was our capital. What better thing could he do to try to defeat us than go in and take Philadelphia? In September, we fought them at Brandywine. And we women were close enough that we could take water to the soldiers, to our soldiers, and refill their canteens. This was the first battle I was in, but we were able to do this for our men. Now, we were warned about not going on to the battlefield, but our men are there. So if there are danger, we could take that danger too. Women have been wounded. Back before we joined the Army, my son and I, there was a woman who was fighting beside her husband who was firing a cannon from Fort Washington before Fort Washington fell. And he was killed right next to her. But she continued working with the team firing the cannon until she was injured too, but she survived. Well, things went bad at Brandywine and we had to retreat so fast we almost ran over the baggage train. But luckily, the redcoats didn't follow us. General Howe called them off, or I think we probably would have been done in. All September and October, we spent marching around avoiding General Howe and the redcoats because General Washington didn't seem to want a face-to-face combat with him. But finally, he decided it was time. So at Germantown, General Washington and our troops attacked General Howe. Once again, it went badly. And luckily, General Howe did not follow us, and he went to Philadelphia instead. Luckily, the Continental Congress had already fled to New Jersey, so they were safe. So we sat and watched the Redcoats in Philadelphia until it was time to go into winter quarters, and we went to Valley Forge. Now, let me tell you a little bit about the soldiers who were in the Army. It's hot work. The privates, the corporals, and the sergeants. They're poor people. Many of the privates are young men, some 16 and 17 years old, some in their 20s. Many of them are barely men, just 15 and 16. Some are older, but even the older ones are poor. Some of them can read, but most of them can't. So I write letters for some of these young men, and I read the letters that come to them. But a lot of men don't get any letters at all because no one in their family reads or writes. It's hard to get these young men to go to prayer services, even though we really need it. They're away from their parents. They're around other coarse men. They learn to swear. And after a while, some of their women do too. Now, the enlisted officers, the enlistment officers, are not supposed to take in men that are younger than 16. But if they're trying to fill the ranks, and they are trying to fill the ranks, they'll take just about anybody who walks through that door. They're not supposed to take apprentices who don't have a note of permission that says that the master of the apprentice can go ahead and join the military. But they take them anyway. Now, some masters actually send their apprentices because the apprentices are so bad that they can't stand it, and they're going to get paid by the army, supposedly, and that money goes to the master, not to the apprentice. And when young men are paid, that money goes to their parents to help support the family, if they have a family, and many don't. Now, the young boys, the very young boys, come in as drummers or fifers. So soldiers aren't used in these positions. The soldiers can be fighting soldiers. And some of these young boys who come in, I know one of 10 years old.
Oh, wow.
They had to actually find him a little drum because the big drum was too big for him. He couldn't work with it. So they turn their eyes aside when they need to. There are also young men who have come in with their fathers simply because that's where the family is now. Sometimes you have a young man and the father who are soldiers and the mother is with them. Sometimes an officer will bring his young son with him to be his servant. Once drafting started, and it started quite a while ago, they would send a letter to any male. They didn't care how old he was, because it was his job, that man who got the letter, to put a body out in front for the enlisters. So it didn't have to be that man. He could send his son, his brother, a cousin, his apprentice, or he could pay a substitute. Anything to put a person forward. Now, if a young man took the job and was paid as a substitute, that money would go to his family. He wouldn't get that money, but he would become the soldier. Now, as I said, any woman who follows the army joins the army. So we have to obey orders just like the soldiers do. When we disobey, a number of things can happen. We can be reprimanded. Men might be whipped, but rarely will a woman be whipped. But she might be drummed out of the camp. The drummers actually drum her out of the camp. Most of the time, we just get reprimands. But there was one woman who was caught in Valley Forge. There was one woman who was caught stealing property from other soldiers. And she was whipped 100 times before she was drummed out of camp. Now, this is in the winter. And it was cold. And now she's out there on her own. And you think, what happened to her? So far from home, so far from family. And you realize what a risk it is not to obey orders. And we do. Days in camp are really boring. We women actually are very busy. A lot of women have children. We're washerwomen or cooks, so we're busy. But the poor men, they're supposed to clean up around the camp. They drill and they clean their weapons and things like that. But General Washington banned gambling. Well, first of all, the majority of them didn't have money to gamble with anyway, but he didn't like this bad behavior of gambling. So that was prohibited. When we first arrive in camp, the tents are put up, and sometimes women and children get separate tents. So there would be 6 or 8 of us in a tent, plus any children that somebody had. And other times we share with our messmates. So I might be with my son and 4 other men in a tent. And if I had other children, those children would be with us too. So the tents can be mighty cozy. And in the winter, the men build cabins, and they start building as soon as we get there. So we're in tents until they build the cabins. And in Valley Forge, we were very lucky that the women had their own cabins, at least lucky most of the time when the children behaved. I want to be sure I tell you everything. Liquor. Now the men get a dram of rum every day, a gill of rum every day. But of course, if you're really bored, this isn't enough. So every regiment has a licensed sutler who can sell things to that regiment, blankets or shirts if you actually have the money for it, or more rum. But if they're selling too much and they're drunken soldiers, then that sutler gets the liquor taken away from them and they can't sell it there anymore. But if we're in a camp for very long, it doesn't take very long for tippling houses to pop up outside of the camp. And this is where the men can go and get more liquor if they have any money. But the officers don't want this to happen, so they go around and they take all the liquor away and they close down the tippling houses. We just can't have drunken soldiers. Now, Valley Forge was cold and it was muddy and there wasn't enough food. And there were about 400 of us women and about 300 children. Now, that was the winter that General von Steuben came, and General Washington asked him to teach the troops how to be a better army. Now, the interesting thing about this was that General von Steuben couldn't speak English. So he yelled a lot, figuring if he said it louder, maybe they would understand him better. And finally, they found some men who actually spoke German, and they would translate for him, but there was still a lot of yelling. And I think the there was a lot of swearing involved with that too. But the soldiers actually got better. So first they taught the sergeants all of the drills, and then the sergeants taught all of the men to drill. And they actually got pretty good, and it gave them something to do when they were cold and hungry. Now, in Valley Forge, now this was my first winter encampment, and it surprised me because these beautiful ladies started showing up in nice carriages. And these were the officers' wives, and they came and spent the winter. Now, they stayed in much nicer places than we did, but I think they were pretty cold a lot of the time too. But they didn't work to earn their rations like we do. And they pretty much, sometimes they knitted mittens for the officers, but that was it. And they had lunches, and they had tea, and they had dinners, and they danced. And some of the officers asked to go on furlough to visit their families or to take care of their businesses. And they got to leave. Now, our soldiers don't get to leave, even when there's not enough food or they don't have enough clothes, they have to stay. So if the soldiers don't get if the officers don't get the furloughs that they want, they quit. And they can quit. They haven't enlisted. So if they don't like the promotions, if they don't like whoever's been promoted above them, or they don't like how things are being run, they can quit. And they just do. Now, the 2nd New Jersey was sent out of Valley Forge in April, and we spent April, May, and part of June down in Mount Holly and Haddonfield under General Maxwell. And then in June, General Howe left Philadelphia. He just up and left and moved into New Jersey. Now, we were already in New Jersey. So General Maxwell was instructed to use our troops to slow General Howe down so General Washington could catch up with him. So the men destroyed bridges and cut down big trees across the roads. And sometimes there were skirmishes, and every now and then someone was killed. So it was particularly worrisome because it was, you know, they went out almost every day, and we were used to one big battle and then it was over. So this was every day you worry, oh, there they go again. Is somebody going to be killed? And it was very, very worrisome. We rejoined the rest of the army on July 27th, and the next day we fought the Battle of Monmouth. Now, General Maxwell and the New Jersey troops went forward with General Lee. Oh, what a mistake. General Lee didn't know what was going on, and everything fell apart, and we had to retreat, and not in very good order, I should say. Well, Washington caught up with General Lee, and they sent us to the rear in reserve. So we heard the rest of the Battle of Monmouth. And some of the women that we knew who were with the artillery, they did fight that day. They brought water to their men because the artillery was near water down the hill. So they would bring water up to their men. And some of those women actually manned the cannons as well. It was horrible because it was so hot. Men died from the heat, not just from the artillery and the guns. It was just awful. Finally, General Howe withdrew and headed east to the New Jersey coast. And that was the end of the battle. Now, this was one of those battles that I'll admit, I went around on the battlefield afterwards and checked some pockets for coins. You know, you just do that when they're redcoats and Hessians. Now, after that, one big battle that summer, and that was it for the fighting that year. One big battle and nothing changed. So the New Jersey regiments went into winter quarters in Newark. Not so cold, not so awful. In May, we marched across the state to Easton, Pennsylvania, all the way across the state to Easton. And then we stopped there on the river, on the banks of the River Delaware. And our troops then had to cut a road from the Delaware River to the Susquehanna River. And it took them a month to work through these dense forests. And it took us only 5 days to march it when they were done. And we came to the little town of Wyoming on the Susquehanna River. And a lot of things were put in the boats, and we watched the boats as we climbed up and down the mountains, and we finally got to the tiny town of Tioga. And the men built a temporary fort called, oh dear, what was his name? That General Sullivan. And his job was to take our men out and destroy the villages of the Indians who had the Iroquois Indians, because they had been assisting the redcoats. So they destroyed their villages and their crops, and in a month they returned, and we went all the way back to Easton, Pennsylvania. It took us about 2 weeks. And as soon as we get to Easton, they said, oh, you have to go to West Point. So off we go again, wearing out our shoe leather. Now that winter, we were sent to Jockey Hollow. Now, I don't know why Jockey Hollow is called a hollow. It's the top of a mountain. Well, luckily, the New Jersey regiments got to go down on the other side of the mountain, and their camp was near Vealtown. It was so cold and there was so much snow. It snowed almost 5 feet. And when it melted the next year, there were dead deer under the snow. They had starved to death because they couldn't find any food. It was the worst winter that anybody could remember. That summer, we stayed in Jersey, and our regiment fought at Connecticut Farms and Springfield. And at the end of the summer, nothing had changed. So a whole nother summer at war, and we're still where we were when we're all done. Well, this time, the regiment was sent to Pompton Plains to winter over. This was good. But some of the troops mutinied because they weren't getting paid, and when they did get paid, the money was no good. It's worthless money. So they were angry about that. They were angry that they didn't have money to buy blankets and shirts, and winter was here. And they were angry that there wasn't enough food, and the food that was there was pretty awful. So they mutinied, and the mutiny was stopped, and the 2 ringleaders were executed. And that was the end of it. There was no more complaining, but nothing really changed. So I think as punishment, they sent us up to Jockey Hollow to stay in the huts that the Pennsylvania line was in the previous year. And if you may remember, they mutinied too. Now, I really would have liked to have stayed in Pompton Plains because it was near the river and we could have washed things so much more easily. Then in February, we were sent south a little ways with General Lafayette and some of his New Englanders. And we were told that it was going to be a fast campaign, that they would be gone and they would come right back again. So the women had to stay where we were and they would go. Well, a few days later, they hadn't come back, and we noticed the baggage trains were getting ready. So we're good friends with all the wagoners. We spend a lot of time with them. So we said, where are you going? And they said, we're taking this stuff down to General Lafayette. So we followed the wagons. And we got there just in time for the men to join us. So they thought they were going to leave us behind and not have to put up with us, but no, we caught up with them. Well, we went far south, all the way down to Virginia. And we went round and across and over Virginia, staying out of the way of General Howe's redcoats. And finally, we came and settled in Williamsburg. And after a while, all these troops started to arrive, and they were General Washington and the rest of the Continental Army, and all of these Frenchmen. And we all gathered together there in Williamsburg, and then we marched down to Yorktown. And that's where we are right now in York. And we're told that they're going to begin a siege. And we're hoping that this siege will complicate things so much for General Howe and his redcoats that they'll surrender. And that will be the end of the war, because so far, my son is still safe. Thank you. So, let me tell you a little bit about what I'm wearing. This is a market bonnet. And a woman who's out in public would always be wearing either a market bonnet or a straw hat over her mob cap. And the reason a woman wears a mob cap all the time is it keeps her hair clean. She's around a lot of smoky fires and things like that. So this just keeps you clean. This is a modesty scarf, because we're supposedly modest. So this covers us up and keeps us modest. Because some other clothing that we wear, this is called a short robe, as opposed to a long robe. And there are also outfits that come rather low, and then that would be tucked into there and be more modest. And always wearing an apron. Sometimes you wear an apron that also pins up here. And you'll notice that I don't have any buttons, it's just pins that keep the robe closed. Now the skirt's really simple. It's two pieces sewn together up to about here. And then there's a tie that ties in the front and a tie that ties in the back. So no matter how fat I get, I can still wear the thing. Now, the neat thing about it is that leaves a slit right there. And inside are my pockets. And these are actually separate. They tie on as well. And underneath is my shift. And it is the undergarment, comes down to here, comes up to about here, and comes down 3/4 sleeve. And the shift is the undergarment. And this is the thing that you sleep in, work in, live in. And if you've ever heard the term, somebody is shiftless, it means they're too poor to even own underwear. Oh, wow. Interesting, yeah? Right. So, let's see, what else was I going to tell you? Then those pockets allow me to carry a lot of stuff around with me, including my sewing kit, which I would never be without, because as a laundress, I need to be able to mend things all the time. So I carry my little tiny scissors with me. I have a needle case, has my needles, and a bodkin so I can thread ribbon through a small space. Yes.
That's very clever.
Yes, and I have bone buttons and a thimble. And I have a bone winder. This is how I carry my thread. I just wind it around here. And I just take off the amount of thread I need to mend, and it's all right here. And I also have a piece of beeswax because my thread is made out of linen. And linen is not like cotton. It's not smooth. It has more of a nap to it. So you have to put some beeswax on it so it slides through the fabric easily. Now, underneath all of this, I'm wearing stays. So that's the, I can't try it. Too far down. But they're really, they are solid. And this gives a woman her, the shape she's supposed to have. And you get used to it pretty quickly. They are solid, but it's actually doesn't feel too tight. It actually feels kind of snug, kind of nice. It's neat. So all of the clothes I'm wearing, my sister and I made. A lot of it was hand sewing. I ended up with tennis elbow from all the hand sewing, from gripping the stuff. Who'd have thought? And the only thing I didn't make were the stays. Those are just too hard. I did purchase those. And these are typical shoes. They are single last shoes, which means they don't have a right and a left. And they're held on by big buckles. And if they don't fit perfectly, you stuff fur inside the toes, so that, or leaves or something like that. And so you can wear bigger shoes because you take what you can get. I think that's it. Oh, one thing, I should be a lot dirtier. I'm way too clean, way too clean. And I wear glasses normally, but one of the things that reenactors absolutely hate is people who wear modern glasses. Either you get old spectacles and get the glasses put in, which you can do, or you just watch the blur. Any questions?
What are the stays made out of?
The stays were made out of, these are modern ones. They're made out of very lightweight steel. But the old ones would have been whalebone or something, or horn or something like that, something quite solid. Yes?
Are the stays like my grandmother's corset?
No, not quite. Your grandmother's corset was really more elastic that held it together. And she might have had a few upright pieces of boning in there. These are more sidelong, like this. They go along the sides rather than straight up and down.
Okay.
They're really.
And do they have laces on them?
Oh, yes. Me and the cat had a real interesting time.
Why did you carry buttons when you didn't have any, what you had, said you have?
Some of the officers did.
Oh, that's it.
Yes,
right,
we
yeah.
poor people did not.
Oh, okay,
Yeah.
because I've seen that.
Good question. Hey, wait a minute, how come the buttons?
I was gonna say there are no buttons.
Yeah, we did not have
How
buttons.
did they do
And
the
you wear
elastic?
underpants?
I beg your pardon. Yes.
How did they do your little the way your arm is gathered?
It's
Oh,
with a ribbon. It's with a
Okay.
ribbon. Same thing up here. Yeah. Yeah. Yes.
Did you have scissors or?
Yes, I have little scissors here. And somebody who made a lot of clothes would have big shears. Yes, they would have had something better. Yeah. And please feel free to come up and look at this when we're done here. Yeah.
You mentioned that sometimes there were specialists coming to camp, like you said.
The carpenters, the blacksmith, and the hang on, I've lost the word.
Was it artificers?
Artificers, thank you.
And what is that?
They're the guys that dig ditches, that build the carriages for the cannons to be on. They're sort of the engineers.
How are the stays fastened together?
It's cloth on the inside, cloth on the outside, and another layer of cloth. It's very, very thick.
Oh, I see it. And
Yeah,
then you
yeah,
stitch
you make little
between.
channels for them to go into.
Okay.
Yes.
How do you start a fire?
Ah, that's very good. I don't have this yet, and I apologize. My sutler didn't come through. I had ordered some things and I was promised I would get them by tomorrow and they didn't come through. I'm getting his license pulled. So what it was is you would have a piece of iron that's kind of C-shaped that you hold, and it has two flanges sticking out that sit away from your fingers, and you take a piece of flint and you strike it so that it sparks, and you have something very soft to start it with. Sometimes it's wood shavings or something like that to get the spark going. So you would carry that with you.
Like at Valley Forge, did you have people who kept the fires going like all night? Like somebody would stay up, keep the fires going so that troops wouldn't get cold.
There isn't that much wood.
There wasn't that much wood.
No, you think about how many people were there. And I'm sorry, I don't have this number for you, but there were 400 women there and they were 3% of the troops. So do the numbers.
Wow.
Yeah.
What did you cook when you?
Well, they tried to have beef. Beef was the easiest thing, but you had to find them. And it was actually up to the Continental Congress to keep providing this food. So they were supposed to find the money that the commissary people were supposed to be able to go out and buy meat and stuff like that. And they bring it on the hoof. So beef was the most common meat because it was the easiest. There was also salt meat. And very often if the men were going to go on a march of 1 or 2 days and then come back to the same camp, they'd get all of their rations. They would cook them ahead of time, and then they would leave their kettles behind and go off with their food in a bag and just eat it cold whenever they could. Yes.
You mentioned nursing duty was not something you look forward to because of the risk of like typhoid and typhus and camp fever. Is that dysentery?
It's that it can be dysentery, but it could also just be unexplained fever that goes around. But dysentery was a real problem too, and nice being able to empty those chamber pots. But that's what the nurses got. Yeah, that's why they didn't want to be it. Yeah. Anyone else? All right, well, thank you very much.